players, and welcome back. So today's the Miami Dolphins, and let's face it, it's always fun when the sun's out in Miami. But when we look at this team, they're a team that's going to get a lot of investment early. A lot of teams, both in terms of the betting markets and in terms of fantasy. We've been doing DraftKings. We've seen people take the all-Miami lineup through the first 4 rounds. And it is something that, listen, these guys are either going to pay like crazy or they're going to destroy your wallet. Either way, what do we think of the Miami Dolphins moving here as we jump into this fantasy discussion for the first half and then the betting market for the second half?
So Miami was a team that I was not high on coming into the offseason last year. I didn't like the way that Mike McDaniel kind of threw air to the wind with Tua when he was injured. But the Miami Dolphins definitely proved us wrong last year. 11 wins last year. And from a fantasy perspective,
10.4. I mean, It's not super wrong.
From a fantasy perspective, they're a highly efficient offense. They score a lot of points. They get a lot of yards. There's a lot of points per play. They convert third down, top 15 in the league. They don't really go for it on fourth down, and the red zone scoring is top notch. They score a lot, but they don't really possess the ball a lot. When it comes to Miami, their time of possession is 15th, and so it's an offense that is very fast, very very efficient. When we look at their PFF rankings in terms of their offensive line, the Dolphins were 20th last year, and they only went up to 18th this year. With that said, with the way that McDaniel runs his offense, these players are allowed to cook. They're allowed to bring out their best talents. Heck, I mean, Mostert had 21 touchdowns last year, which is crazy, right? And Tyreek Hill continues to excel as a wide receiver, capping off at almost 1,800 yards last year. And Jalen Waddle is a great number 2 for an NFL perspective. Very selfless to be able to give a guy like Tyreek Hill almost 1,800 yards and, not bat an eye at it, right? So we look at it and we say, okay, where are the players to own here at value? Well, Jalen Waddle last year ended up with over 1,000 yards, 72 receptions, ended up ranked as the 31st best wide receiver in regards to, the totality of everything.
That's some injuries, but it is where he ended.
It had injuries, only played in 14 games. That's behind Adam Thielen, behind Zay Flowers, behind Cortland Sutton, but ahead of Chris Godwin, ahead of Terry McLaurin, ahead of Cooks and Garrett Wilson. When you look at how to build a team, we have seen a lot of people go after the Miami Dolphins because in terms of player stacking and the player stacking perspective, it's really easy to stack Miami players.
Sure.
So if you are in on Miami and you have a top 3, top 4 pick, usually top 2 will get you. Usually top.
You have to be early to get Tyreek.
You could go Tyreek Hill, Devin Achane, and then your third round, you could end up picking up Jalen Waddle if you decided to do something like that, and then you could pick up Raheem Mostert. You could visibly have all of the Miami Dolphins.
In a baseball league, it might not be a bad idea for the beginning part of the season.
It's not something that I would protest to, right? Because when I'm looking at the way that Miami plays, they're a fairly balanced team in terms of how many rushes and how many passes that they do per game. From the back half of the season onward. From the beginning of the season, it more skews towards passing than it does runs, but they're highly efficient running the ball.
Yes, they are.
So you look at it and you say, okay, Raheem Mostert had 46% of the team's attempts, Devin Achane 23%. In terms of targets, they were a little bit more into Devin Achane, but not too much. So Raheem Mostert was in the game a lot. Devin Achane, when he was healthy, was also a big piece. He was a game-breaking piece to this offense. Now, what we need to kind of say with Devin Achane, at least, is that I really have nothing bad necessarily to say about Achane, but he's not one of the players that I am targeting at that position. Yes, he did finish as running back 5 in points per game last year. Yes, he played a low amount of snaps. He did average a decent amount of touches, but when we look at the season stats and we look at the game logs, specifically the game logs, is that after that injury last year, he had a 22-point game, a 19-point game, and a 12-point game. Before that injury, we're all looking at that Denver game, and we're like 203 yards. That's elite. And we're looking at the Buffalo game, 24 points, 20. All of this is great. When we look at it, we say, okay, well, they just brought in a third running back in Jalen Wright, who also, has speed, but his vision might not be great. So does he slot into Raheem Mostert's role, or does he slot in better to Devin Achane's role? Or, as McDaniel does, is he going to use all three of these players? And most likely he's going to use all three of his players. He's really good at using his players' talent and making the team around them build around that talent rather than try to fit the talent into a square peg, which, is really good for him. Again, he throws caution to the wind a lot, which I'm not like a fan on, and on player safety and stuff. But when it comes to coaching fantasy players, there's a lot to like about the top talent that Miami is throwing at you, right? So Tua's coming off, usually around pick 113. He's quarterback 16 in Fantasy Pros, our quarterback 12. He's going to have another pretty good year. As long as Tyreek Hill stays healthy, as long as Jalen Waddle stays healthy, Tua is going to have a pretty good year. He threw for over 4,624 yards. He was the player with the highest air yards, so that really benefits guys like Tyreek Hill, and not so much Jalen Waddle. But again, for a guy that's going to pass the ball, attempt to pass the ball as many times as he did, he's still ranked very high. He's behind he's behind Trevor, Baker, Jordan Love, Josh Allen, Dak, Patrick Mahomes, Goff, and Sam Howell in terms of passing attempts last year. And when we go to completions, he's fourth. So he completes a lot of passes. Now, we look at it and we say, okay, a quarterback that completes a lot of passes, a team that passes the ball a decent amount, running backs that catch the ball, wide receivers that know how to catch the ball. This is a team that's worth investing in terms of fantasy circles. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg either to get Tua. So if you're looking in best ball leagues and you're saying, okay, I need a quarterback. Well, he's coming, round 11, round 12. I need a quarterback. He's coming off the board after Brock Purdy, coming off the board usually around the same time as Trevor Lawrence, after Dak Prescott. If you didn't get one of the top options, or maybe you did and you're looking for a backup in terms of fantasy circles, he's definitely really good.
He's one of the reasons I argue, Bill, take the quarterback late. If you end up with Tua as your starting quarterback, there's a whole lot worse. Especially if you stack him with another decent option. I think this is a good point to point out, Bob, that the way we do our math is not opinion based. Like what we're giving these answers about fantasy is not opinion based, just how I feel about this or whatnot. This is actually done by the metrics of the betting marketplace. And we go out and we culminate all of that data and turn it into real answers. So when we have our breakdowns of what we believe the team winnings are going to be, we're within a game and a half on virtually the entire league. That's how we were last year. Now, granted, there's about 6 outliners, but there's always 6 outliners. So we look at the percentage of this. We really, really love this. And one of the cool parts about the East is that all 3 of them are basically together. Obviously, New England sucks. They're out of it. But the other 3 are all basically right there. So to your point here about what do we think that Miami's going to do? Well, the betting community already told us they're going to score. Now, granted, it's very early. So Miami is one of these examples, and the story might be a little bit written on this, but that if you're around mid-October, you have any of them that are going off, it's pretty much going to be their peak. They're projected each month to score less than the month before. So that's where I say draft someone, draft an A-chain, get some good weeks out of him early, get a nice little stats in October, in September, get some wins, and then around week 5, week 6, trade him for a piece that you might be lacking in, because I think that this is the best way to utilize the Dolphins. Their schedule sets up for much more points at the beginning of the year, build up the value of your assets, trade them at their high point, week 5, week 6, and really dominate. Obviously, you can't do that in Best Buy, but you can do that in your normal.
Well, I would.
I think it's the best strategy for Dolphins.
Best Buy as a store is incredibly terrible, but Best Ball right there.
But you get what I'm saying.
Is one of those things where, if I'm looking at players, and there's strategies to say that, it's great to get players that are off to a hot start, that is going to have a great first 6 weeks of the season, that you're going to accumulate a decent amount of wins. And then you go into that back half of the season in terms of playoffs. Now, if you're doing tournament models like Best Ball Mania, you got to try to it's hard right
See, they're horrible for Best Ball Mania, because Best Ball Mania is all emphasis on those last 4 weeks of the year, and the Dolphins aren't going to provide.
But it's also,
you got to make the playoffs still, though.
It's really hard right now, outside of like the known knowns in terms of defenses and stuff. It's really hard to project what a team's defense is going to look like in terms of strength of schedule at the back half of the year, right? So
yes and no.
There could be injuries that happen. It could be anything, but the top defenses are most likely going to continue to be the top defenses.
Yeah, the physical ones remain dominant. The finesse ones fall. That's basically what you know.
And then we see teams like, a couple years back where the Jaguars were off to a hot start. Then people started scheming them differently, and then that changed. So, from a strength of schedule perspective, if you have,
and that's the other variable of a defense. You have raw athletic before the scheme's truly introduced. That's where the raw athletic ones do better in September. That's why Miami dominates in September. They're more raw athletic than anyone ever has been.
So when I look at it and I say, like, which players do I want to buy in on? I'm not in on Achane at value, but if he slips enough, and I don't.
So where does he become worth it to you? First of all, where do we have him ranked at, and where does he become worth it to you?
We have him as running back 12. He's going off the board usually at pick 24. He's
like
Fantasy Pros running back 7. So not too far off in that regards. You're going to want to have elite production and elite efficiency out of him. Now, when we look at him, we say, I would take him probably over a Chris Olave. I would probably take him over a Drake London if given the opportunity. I like Drake London. I like Chris Olave, but I don't really like their value so much right there. We'll get into that another day. But if I'm looking for a running back and I'm at the back half of the second round, or I'm at the turn in the third round, you definitely can target Achane, because it will help you potentially avoid that Josh Allen pick that early. And I'm not saying Josh Allen would be a bad pick there. I'm just saying you're setting yourself up to kind of get passed on a lot of other players. But if I'm sitting at that, like I said, Achane is normally coming off the board in that second round, third round, usually to the guys that are in that 1, 2, 3 hole of a pick. And I think I'm comfortable taking him in the third, a couple picks after where he's usually being taken. Now, a guy like Raheem Mostert,
glad you brought him up.
We have him ranked higher than anybody else, probably
by a lot,
by a significant margin. And where those numbers are coming from is from the math that we're doing with, they're going to score, they're going to get into the red zone, it's going to happen.
And the other elephant in the room that most people are forgetting, Mostert's used much more than Achane. But when Achane's used, he's lightning. Over 6 yards a carry, awesome. But he doesn't have the volume to sustain him. Mostert has the volume to sustain it compared to Achane. Not compared to like a Najee Harris, but compared to Achane, he absolutely does.
So when we look at how Raheem Mostert was used last year, you're not outside of the game where he had 115 yards and he had a couple approaching 100 at 96, 94, 86, 85. And he had 121. So a good amount of games where he's almost approaching or at 100 yards. He had some duds. He definitely had some duds. But again, the 21 touchdowns definitely.
You're also not drafting to be a starting running back.
Definitely make it go a little bit crazy. But the stat here that's important is that when they reach the red zone, Raheem Mostert got 47 attempts. When we go even inside the 10, Raheem Mostert had 33 attempts, which is top 3 in the league. When we go inside the 5, he's the second player on this list with 20 attempts. And 12 of his 21 touchdowns came in that 5 yards.
He's the most projectable touchdown vulture in the league this year,
So,
even more than Monty.
Looking at Mostert, he's our running back 8, and that is higher than anybody else in running back 28. We are not saying to take Raheem Mostert over guys in that 3rd round, 4th round range.
No, you don't take him over ETN or something like that.
What we are saying is that if you end up deciding to not go high on running back, or you want a really good 3rd running back or 4th running back,
He's a
ETN,
great 0 running back option.
Raheem Mostert will return value.
Mm-hmm.
He's old, yes. Has he had injuries in the past? Yes. But he doesn't have the mileage on his legs like everybody else, and his usage is much different than everybody else in the league. He has 2 respectable running backs now with the rookie coming out where they're going to be used properly. McDaniel knows how to use his players, and he knows that if he's in the red zone, Raheem Mostert is a reliable threat. So is Raheem Mostert going to return 21 touchdowns? Absolutely not. That's why he's not being drafted that high. But if I can get Raheem Mostert in the 7th, 8th, 9th round of fantasy drafts,
which you can,
you can project him to be a top 10 finish in terms of touchdowns. Like, for example, Joe, just throwing it out there, with Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards last year was one of those players, again, that had a
he
high
scored, but he's
amount.
nowhere near as talented as Mostert.
I get it, but he had a high amount of touchdowns. He ended with 13 touchdowns and 810 yards. Raheem Mostert on the season, even in a split timeshare, still had 1,000 yards and 18 rushing touchdowns. 21 total touchdowns with 3 receiving touchdowns, but not huge reception totals. That's why he's falling a little bit more. But this is a player that I think is almost a must draft at value as you're wading through all of the players in that 7th, 8th, 6th, 7th, 8th round, depending on who you've taken before. Raheem Mostert is going to fit in, slot in really good as a running back 3, potentially flex player. And
I think starting
if you
running
went
back,
zero running
a
back,
true 0 running back strategy, I think he's a great number 2 starter.
If you went 0 running back in the first couple of rounds, maybe you're hitting that James Cook and Mostert. And I think that, even if you get that negative touchdown regression from Mostert, you're probably going to get some positive touchdown regression from Cook, and it's going to probably balance itself out. You're going to probably have 2 1,000-yard rushers on your team, and you're not going to have invested a lot. So out of all the players on this list, I do love Tyreek Hill at value. I think he's incredible. I think where I'm looking at is Raheem Mostert and 2. I think they have the most value out of any player here. I'm not investing in the tight end position when it comes to Miami. That's not something I'm going to do. And again, if Tyreek Hill were to get hurt or Jalen Waddle were to get hurt, you have Odell Beckham, Malik Washington, Braxton Berrios. Anything really that I want to kind of work with or invest in at all. So hopefully those guys stay healthy. 2 should be able to produce another great year. McDaniel knows how to use his players, and even if one of those players goes down, I think it's, this is really going to be a decent year, if not a very good year for any Miami fantasy player.
And as we're concluding this episode, just want to hit a little bit about, as I said earlier, with the East, they're all bunched together. And it's the markets are basically telling you they're all going to be over 500. They're all going to be in the wild card hunt. Basically, we're projecting this to be the division that all 3 of them make the playoffs. Maybe one gets slighted, but realistically speaking, all 3 of them are going to be in a playoff contention. Obviously, you always get some team that sneaks up and wins a couple more than you expect. But as we sit right now, your 3 teams in the playoffs, 2 of your wild cards are coming out of the East. The other one's coming out of the North. That's how the AFC looks out. The Miami Dolphins are an absolute great bet to be the 7th team to make the playoffs. That's where we got them projected right now. And like I said, take them because they're not that far off from winning this division either in terms of how stacked it is. Miami to make the playoffs, I believe, is the best bet of anything involving the Dolphins. Put your money on the table. So, again, team players, we thank you for watching. Right next, if you're watching us live in our scramble, it's going to be a best ball league. Otherwise, check out the next division on Tuesday.